legislation that he just spoke about to bring precisely 0 Afghan refugees. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, if you look at their platform, you will see that they campaign on a commitment to end the government-assisted refugee stream altogether that has resettled thousands of Afghan refugees who now call Canada home.
L'honorable député de Charbonneau-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, on apprend que
Mr. Speaker, December 30th, 2020, 23 Liberal MPs sent a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs calling on him to provide safe passage to Canada for former Afghan mission staff. For his part, the Prime Minister pretended in September 2021 that he didn't have time, the situation was moving too fast, he didn't have time to prepare an evacuation plan. But the Prime Minister said he had no time to do anything in September when the letter was sent in December. Why is the Prime Minister not listening to his own MPs? The Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Support of members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle in this House for their contributions to the effort in Afghanistan. I hope we continue to receive that support and advice from the conversations they're having in those communities. One of the things that came from my conversations over the course of that campaign was the opportunity to engage with the government to say that we should be doing more. We should be increasing our ambition. The situation in Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul is precisely why we've decided to step up and make one of the most substantial commitments of any country in the world to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees. I'm proud we made that commitment, and I'm pleased to be the minister responsible for making good on it.
L'honorable député de Sudbury.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government knows that immigration is critical to Canada's economic recovery. Rural and northern communities are facing significant demographic challenges. They often have difficulty attracting and retaining newcomers who tend to choose to settle in larger centers. Could the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship inform this House how the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program is helping communities like Sudbury attract and retain more newcomers?
Le ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens à
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the member for Sudbury for this important question and the opportunity to practice my French. Immigration is essential to Canada's economic recovery. Immigration into rural and northern communities is an effort we have made. We've managed to welcome them in 11 different communities like Sudbury. These are people who work in our hospitals, our businesses, and they make significant contributions to our communities. I'm looking forward to continuing that work to welcome more newcomers into small communities all throughout Canada.
Hartford, Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear regularly from Canadian charities working overseas about the damage direction and control regulations are causing. These silly regulations force charities to spend millions of dollars in unnecessary legal fees and obstruct genuine partnership by requiring donor control. So could the government tell us if they will finally listen to the sector and support our efforts to end outdated and neo-colonial direction and control regulations?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, que je peux dire à...
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell my colleague is that the Revenue Agency works with all charitable organizations to make sure that they respect the law and the rules. We'll continue to do our work. I invite my colleague, if he has any specific questions, to contact my office. Thank you.
Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, for far too long, direction control regulations have limited the collaboration between charities and other organizations. That's why I'm proud to sponsor Bill S-216 in this House. Bill S-216 would replace direction control with an accountability framework that would allow for constructive and equal partnerships between charitable organizations and the communities they serve. It has already passed the Senate unanimously. Will this government commit to working with us to ensure this bill passes during the 44th Parliament?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, notre organisme va continuer de travailler.
Our organization will continue to work to end discrimination based on race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, disability. Processes are in place to deal with these subjects of concern. Earlier this year, I announced a summit on Islamophobia A systemic study is addressing the concerns of Muslim communities. I appointed a member of the Muslim community to be part of our committee, and these types of actions will allow the agency to pave the way to a more inclusive future for our country. Thank you.
Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, respectfully, that was a much worse answer than I was expecting. This is a question about direction and control. Again, to the minister, or some minister, we want an answer about direction and control regulations. Bill F-216 from my colleague has been before this Parliament and the Senate for years in the same form. Surely the government is aware of it. Surely the government has heard from someone in the development sector. So could we please get an answer to the question? Could we please get some good news instead of nonsense talking points on completely different issues? What is the government's position on reforming direction and control?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure my colleague that the Canada Revenue Agency respects the rules, the regulations, and measures in place. The agency makes sure that people respect their agreements with the government. We will continue to work on that with our partners in the sector. Thank you.
For Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. Canada's support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity has been steadfast. We have been there for the people of Ukraine with economic, social, development, and military support. But with Russia's increasing aggression and with threats of a further invasion of Ukraine, I and many Canadians are more concerned than ever. Could the Minister of Foreign Affairs please share with Canadians what steps we are taking and will take to deter a Russian invasion of Ukraine and to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you to my colleague. Of course, I can't answer his important question, and thank you for his solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We're deeply concerned by the continued buildup of Russian troops in and around Ukraine. My top priority is ensuring the safety and security of all Canadians on the ground. I'm urging Canadians in Ukraine to leave now. We will continue to stand steadfast in our support for Ukraine and its people at every step of the way. Any further Russian incursions will face serious consequences. Thank you.
For North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government made a huge mistake when they cut some of the most vulnerable seniors off of GIS, on which they rely on to purchase basic things like housing, medication, and food. They feel hopeless and they feel abandoned. New Democrats have been asking this government since before last election to fix this problem. Finally, the minister announced a one-time payment, but it's not till May. Seniors are in desperate need now to stave off hunger and eviction. So again, I'm asking, will the minister support seniors at risk and immediately release emergency funds?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member and her advocacy on this. We both share a deep desire to support those most in need seniors. I'm very pleased to share that we are now going to be able to deliver payments to those who saw GIS reduced ahead of schedule as early as April 19th. Service Canada will also be working with members of Parliament to help constituents in dire need to get support sooner in March, and we will continue to be there to support seniors through our increases in pension benefits. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment just to thank the officials for their extraordinary work, and I look forward to continuing to have these conversations with the honourable member. Thank you.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ironically, 2 years ago today, the former leader of the official opposition said this, quote, "These protesters, these activists, may have the luxury of spending days at a time on a blockade, but they need to check their privilege," unquote. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that we have a larger problem in this country of a double standard when it applies to how Indigenous protesters are treated by the police, how anti-Black racism protesters are treated. And I'd ask the honourable members and the minister if there is, in fact, a way to examine the double standard in policing and bring the implicit racism in the way we treat protests to an end.
Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question. Of course, we always have the expectation that our RCMP and all law enforcement will exercise their duties responsibly in a manner that is respectful and consistent with the Charter. I would point out that over the last number of days, that law enforcement, including the RCMP, have done an exceptional job. And I would like to thank them for ensuring that we can get our economy going by reopening the border, by allowing Canadians to get back to work, Mr. Speaker. And the only double standard that I think we're all worried about here is when the Conservatives are going to finally join with the government and call on the illegal blockade to go home.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons aujourd'hui.
That's all the time we have.
Comme il est 15h10, conformément à l'ordre adopté,
It being 3:10, pursuant to order made on Thursday, November 25th, 2021.
to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Ms. Bergen relating to the business of supply. Convoquez les députés.
Call in the members.
Merci. La question est la
The question is the following one.
Bergen, seconded by Monsieur Berthold, moved that given that provinces are lifting COVID-19 restrictions and that Dr. Theresa Tam has said that all existing public health measures need to be reevaluated so that we can get back to some normalcy, the House call on the government to table a plan for lifting of all federal mandates and restrictions and to table the plan by February 28, 2022. La période.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started. And the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person.
All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Ms. Bergen, Ms. Finley, Mr. Poitis, Mr. Nader, Mr. Marlowe, Mr. Chong, Ms. Rumpel-Garner, Mr. Moore, Mr. Brassard, Mr. Berthold, Mr. Fast, Mr. Albus, Mr. Holbach, Mr. Macaulay Edmonton West, Mr. Schmale, Mr. Vidal, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Tucker, Mr. Jinmis, Mrs. Vecchio, Mr. Baldinelli, Mr. Lloyd, Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Generou, Mr. Duncan Stormont Dundas South Glengarry, Mrs. Gray, Mr. Kimiet, Mr. Hawkins, Ms. Landsman, Mr. Upal, Mrs. Kuzi, Mr. Malilo, Mr. Aitchison, Mr. Lobb, Mr. Zimmer, Mr. Perkins, Mrs. Gallant, Mr. Reed, Mr. Small, Mr. Caputo, Ms. Ferrari, Mr. Viss, Mr. Gourde, Mr. Steinley, Ms. Rude, Mr. Ellis, Madame Vien, Mrs. Goodridge, Mr. Hallam, Mr. Bazan, Mr. Dreeshen, Mrs. Block, Mr. Williamson, Mr. McGuire, Mr. Aboutaif, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Généreux, Mr. Deltel, Mr. Godin, Mr. Cooper, Ms. Ledoux, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kitchen, Mrs. Stubbs, Mr. Leifert, Mr. Shields, Mr. Waugh, Mr. Weber, Mr. Motts, Mr. Davidson, Mr. Barrett, Mr. Pearson, Monsieur Lehoux, Mr. Bragdon, Mr. Dalton, Mr. Dowdle, Mr. Epp, Mr. Cram, Mr. Turek, Mr. D'Entremont, Mr. Major, Mr. McLean, Mr. Morantz, Mr. Morrison, Mr. Patzer, Mr. Reddecup, Mr. Shipley, Mr. Soroka, Mr. Van Popta, Mr. Ruff, Mr. Brock, Mr. Chambers, Mr. News, Mrs. Roberts, Mr. Tolney, Mr. Williams, Mr. Poliev, Mr. Terrien, Mr. Bergeron, Madame de Bellefeuille, Madame Michaud, Monsieur Simard.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
Mr. Blair, Monsieur Duclos, Monsieur Rodriguez, Monsieur Leblanc, Ms. Freeland, Monsieur Champagne, Ms. Anand, Ms. Gould, Mr. Aldabra, Madame Petipa-Taylor, Monsieur Boissonneau, Mr. Scarboleggia, Madame Saint-Onge, Monsieur Vandal, Madame Fortier, Ms. Murray, Mr. Lamoureux, Monsieur McKinnon-Gatineau, Ms. Ing, Madame Jolie, Ms. Ian, Ms. Haidoo, Mr. Miller, Mr. Mendicino, Mr. Hussain, Mr. Fraser, Madame Bendayan, Monsieur Serré, Monsieur Arsenault, Mr. Biddle, Mr. Garrettson, Mrs. Romanato, Ms. Zerowitz, Mr. Anandasangari, Mr. Baker, Madame Lalonde, Ms. Dillon, Monsieur Essasi, Mr. Van Couverden, Ms. O'Connell, Mr. Kellaway, Ms. Sachs, Mr. Cedar Brampton East, Mr. May Cambridge, Mr. Fragistatos, Ms. Khalid, Mr. Longfield, Mr. Maloney, Mr. McDonald Avalon, Mr. Sorbera, Mrs. Zaid, Ms. Yip, Mr. Dong, Mr. Duberry, Mr. Shahal, Ms. Kayabaga, Mr. Miao, Mrs. Valdez, Mr. Julian, Mr. Garrison, Ms. Blaney, Ms. Edlott, Mr. Cannings, Ms. Vizon, Ms. Barron, Mr. Backrack, Madame Hughes, Mr. Angus, Ms. May Saanich Gulf Islands, Mr. Morris, Mr. Blanc.
La Chambre attendra maintenant.
The House will now wait for the electronic voting period to end before resuming its proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to vote for the motion.
Ms. Thomas, against called. Deaf.
Mr. Falk.
Speaker, I just want to confirm that my vote was a yay.
That it was a yay, yes. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to confirm that I voted in favor of this motion to end the mandates.
Yes, confirmed. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On my app, it came, my vote came back very late saying that it was a yay. So I just want to ensure that my vote is indeed a yay, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
It was a yay, yes. And that's it. Ms. Thomas, did you raise your hand again? No, you're taken care of?
My hand again. I'm sorry, I just need clarification that I am registered as voting yes for the motion.
We have you registered as yes. The table will now compile the results.
Yeas pour 151, 151. Nays contre 185.
I declare the motion defeated.
Hi everyone, MP Garnagenis here with just a follow-up reaction to the vote. I want to break it down for you, and I encourage you to share this video, like and follow this page, because now we've seen where politicians stand on these issues, and we have an opportunity now to follow up and hold them accountable. So today, the Conservative motion to require the federal government to put forward a plan to end mandates was voted on. We proposed it and debated it on Thursday of last week. The vote took place today. Now, you would have seen the vote, first members of Parliament voting in person who were in the chamber, followed up by those who were not physically present voting online through the voting app. So what we saw right out of the gate then was Conservatives, of course, all together voting in favor of our motion. Conservatives are united in our commitment to requiring the government to put forward a plan to end federal mandates. The Bloc, thankfully, voted with us. They haven't always been with us on every issue, of course, but it's been good to see the Bloc supporting our motion. The Liberals, all but one, as well as all the NDP, kind of working together in an informal coalition, unfortunately, they voted against the motion. So sadly, the motion was defeated. 151 MPs voting in favor of that motion and 185 voting against. Conservatives and Bloc voting in favor of the motion, all of them, and all but one of the Liberals and the NDP, I should say the Greens as well, voting against the motion. You would have heard a cheer at one point where they were showing the online votes, and that's when we saw Joel Lightbound. Joel Lightbound is the Liberal MP from Quebec, former Quebec caucus chair for the Liberal Party, who came out last week to speak out against the division and the unscientific approach taken by the Prime Minister. A bold move for Joel Lightbound, speaking out against the Prime Minister. He followed that up today by voting in favor of the Conservative motion. So it would have been 150 votes in favor. It was actually 151 votes because it was Conservatives, Bloc, and one lone Liberal standing out, Joel Lightbound. So we see clearly kind of the shape of the House of Commons in terms of who is standing where. Conservatives are strong, leading the charge, saying we need to see a plan from the government to end these mandates. And folks, we lost the vote today. This is the nature of the House of Commons. Elections have consequences, and we didn't elect enough Conservatives to form a Conservative government, which means that oftentimes we don't get our way. It's not as easy as saying just put forward the motion, because a lot of the motions we put forward don't pass. But it's important that we put this forward. It's important that we had the vote. And the debate is going to continue. We're going to continue raising these issues. We're going to continue speaking out. We're going to continue highlighting the concerns we have. You look across this country. You look around the world. Provinces in Canada, other countries around the world are lifting their vaccine mandates. In Canada, we have very high levels of vaccination. We have provinces that recognize that the continuing aggressive restrictive measures that we're seeing are simply, if they were ever justified, they're certainly no longer necessary. And yet, in the midst of provinces and other countries lifting restrictions, recognizing that we're moving towards a stage where putting in place that plan is entirely appropriate, we see the Liberal government doubling down on their divisive approach, trying to, if anything, talk about increasing restrictions, and people are, of course, reacting to that. Kelly Block, one of my colleagues, made a statement before question period that really stuck out at me. She said, in Canada, we believe in this principle of peace, order, and good government. And when you don't have good government, oftentimes it's harder to have that peace and order in place. So Conservatives are calling for an end to blockades. We're calling for people to adhere to the rule of law. But what we see is that the Prime Minister intentionally being divisive in his approach, trying to divide Canadians, and that is leading to tension, division, and conflict that, of course, we don't want to see. And now he's being called out about it by even one of his own MPs, Joel Lightbound, making the stand he did today, joining with Conservatives in the bloc and voting in favor of this motion. So I'm disappointed the motion didn't pass, but I'm glad we put it forward. I'm glad MPs had an opportunity to stand up and be counted on which side they are. And I'd encourage all of you, share this video, follow my page, and call your local member of parliament. Either thank them for voting in favor of the motion or tell them they should have voted in favor of the motion and that you're going to be looking for a different member of parliament in the next election who will actually stand up for the rights and freedoms of Canadians and who will push for leadership that takes a less divisive approach. So thanks everyone for watching. The fight is not over. The fight will continue in the House of Commons through peaceful rallying and peaceful speaking out. We need to work to end these mandates through constructive democratic means, and we're going to continue to use all the tools at our disposal in the House of Commons to put forward these critical issues. Thanks very much everyone for watching. Have a great day. Keep up the fight.